My boyfriend's family pretended to be poor to test me, so I pretended to be broke and watched them beg. I'd been dating Adrian for 8 months when he finally invited me to meet his family at their house for Sunday dinner. He seemed nervous during the drive, which I found sweet considering how confident he usually was. "Just so you know, my family is pretty low-key," he said, adjusting his grip on the steering wheel. "We don't have much, but what we have, we share." I squeezed his hand and told him I didn't care about any of that, which was true. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already done my research. LinkedIn is a beautiful thing. His father, Richard, owned 3 luxury car dealerships across the state. His mother, Diane, sat on the board of directors for 2 major corporations. His older sister, Veronica, was a partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. The address he'd given me was in Meadowbrook, where the average home price was $2.3 million. So when we pulled up to a modest ranch house with peeling paint and an overgrown lawn in a completely different neighborhood, I knew exactly what was happening. They were testing me. Adrian parked in the driveway next to a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, and I noticed the garage door was closed, probably hiding whatever luxury vehicles they actually drove. "This is it," he said, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. I smiled and said it looked cozy, then followed him to the front door. His mother answered, wearing a faded sweatshirt and old jeans, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "You must be Sloan," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt calculated. Come in, come in. Sorry about the mess." The house was decorated like a stage set for struggling middle-class family. Mismatched furniture that was probably rented, generic artwork on the walls, and a TV that had to be at least 15 years old. But I noticed the small details they'd missed. The Hermes scarf casually draped over a chair, the Mont Blanc pen on the side table, the barely visible tan line on Richard's wrist where an expensive watch usually sat. I complimented the house and Diane smiled, saying they'd lived here for 20 years and it had good bones even if it needed work. Dinner was served on chipped plates with bent forks, and I watched Adrian's sister Veronica struggle not to grimace as she used the obviously cheap cutlery. His younger brother Mitchell kept glancing at me like he was waiting for me to bolt. Richard asked what I did for work, and I told him I was between jobs at the moment, which wasn't technically a lie since I'd recently sold my marketing firm for 8 figures and was taking time off. "Tough economy," Richard said sympathetically. "What field were you in?" I kept it vague and said digital marketing, doing some freelance work here and there. Diane jumped in asking if I'd gone to college, and I said I'd done a couple years but had to drop out due to financial issues, which was completely false, but I wanted to see where this was going. The whole family exchanged these quick looks like they'd just confirmed something. Mitchell asked if I had student loans, and I said I was still paying them off, which made Diane touch Adrian's arm with this concerned expression. "That must be stressful," she said in a tone that was probably meant to sound supportive but came across as condescending. Throughout dinner, they kept dropping hints about their supposed financial struggles. Richard mentioned how expensive car repairs were, even though I'd seen his LinkedIn post from last month about expanding his dealership empire. Diane talked about clipping coupons and shopping sales, despite the Cartier Love bracelet I'd spotted in a photo on her office wall from the company website. Veronica complained about law school debt, which was hilarious considering she'd graduated 15 years ago and was pulling in 7 figures annually. The performance was almost impressive in its coordination. After dinner, Adrian excused himself to help his mom in the kitchen, and Richard suggested I join him on the back porch for some air. I followed him outside to a deck that desperately needed staining, and he leaned against the railing with this serious expression. "Adrian really cares about you," he started, and I could feel the setup coming. "We just want to make sure you care about him for the right reasons." I played dumb and asked what he meant. Richard said that Adrian was a good kid with a big heart, and they'd seen him get hurt before by people who were more interested in what he could provide than who he was. I asked if he was asking about my intentions, and Richard nodded. "We're not a wealthy family, Sloan. What you see is what you get. If you're with Adrian expecting some kind of upgrade or financial support, you should know that's not something we can offer." I looked him dead in the eye and said I was with Adrian because I loved him, not because of what was in his bank account. Richard seemed satisfied with that answer and patted my shoulder before heading back inside. I stayed on the porch for a minute, pulling out my phone to text my assistant. "Pull my investment portfolio details. I need the documentation showing I'm broke. Create a paper trail for student loans, credit card debt, the works. Make it look convincing." She responded within seconds saying she was on it. When I went back inside, Diane pulled me aside for what I assumed would be the mother's version of Richard's talk. She held both my hands and said she could tell I was a sweet girl, but she needed to be honest with me. "Adrian has big dreams," she said carefully. "He wants to start his own business someday, buy a house, have a family. Those things take money and stability. I just want to make sure you two are on the same page about what your future might look like." I told her I understood completely, and that I was working hard to get back on my feet financially, but it might take some time. Diane's expression shifted to something that looked like pity, mixed with concern. "Have you thought about what happens if things get serious between you two? How you'd contribute to a household?" I said I'd figure it out and that Adrian and I were a team. We'd work through any challenges together. Diane nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. When Adrian and I left that night, he apologized for his family being so intense. "They just worry," he said. "Money's always been tight for us, so they get protective about making sure I don't end up in a difficult situation." I kissed his cheek and told him I understood, then asked if we could stay at my place that night. He agreed, and when we got to my modest 1-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, I could see him relax. What he didn't know was that I also owned the penthouse downtown and a beach house in Malibu, but this apartment served its purpose for maintaining appearances. Over the next 2 weeks, Adrian's family ramped up their poor family act, while simultaneously digging into my background. Mitchell friended me on social media, and I watched him screenshot my carefully curated posts showing thrift store finds and budget meals. Veronica invited me to lunch and spent the whole time talking about how expensive everything was and how she wished she could afford nicer things. The performance was exhausting, but I played along, showing up to family gatherings in Target clothes and driving my decade-old backup car. I complained about my landlord raising rent and mentioned picking up extra freelance work to make ends meet. I watched them exchange satisfied glances, clearly believing their test was working. Then Adrian's birthday came around. His family planned a small party at the ranch house, and I showed up with a gift I'd spent considerable time selecting. It was a first edition book he'd mentioned wanting, and it had cost me $12,000 at auction. But I'd had it rebound in a cheap cover and told him I'd found it at a used bookstore for $20. He was thrilled, having no idea of its actual value, and his family looked at the cheap gift with barely concealed disappointment. That's when Diane pulled me aside again. "Sloan, honey, can we talk?" She led me to the kitchen where Veronica and Richard were waiting. The three of them looked at me with these serious expressions, and I knew the real conversation was about to happen. Richard started by saying they'd all grown very fond of me over the past few weeks. Diane added that they could see how happy I made Adrian. Then Veronica cut to the chase. "But we're concerned about the financial dynamic of your relationship." I asked what they meant, playing innocent. Veronica said they'd noticed I was struggling financially, which was completely understandable, but they worried about how that would affect Adrian's future. "He's worked so hard to get where he is," Richard said. "We just don't want to see him held back by having to support someone who can't contribute equally." The words hung in the air, and I let them. Diane jumped in with what she probably thought was a kind tone. "We're not saying you're a bad person, Sloan. We can see you have a good heart, but sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes practical considerations have to matter too." I asked if they were asking me to break up with Adrian, and the three of them exchanged looks. "We're asking you to think about what's best for him," Veronica said carefully. "Is it fair to let him build a future with someone who's going to be a financial burden?" I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my voice steady. I told them I understood their concerns, but Adrian and I were adults who could make our own decisions about our relationship. Richard shook his head and said, "We hoped you'd be reasonable about this. We're prepared to make it worth your while to walk away." He pulled out an envelope and set it on the counter between us. "There's $5,000 in there. Take it, tell Adrian you're moving for a job opportunity, and let him move on with his life." I stared at the envelope, then at the three of them. Diane actually had tears in her eyes like she hated doing this. Veronica looked businesslike and cold. Richard just looked determined. I picked up the envelope, opened it, and counted the cash while they watched. Then I laughed. It started as a chuckle but built into full, genuine laughter that made all three of them uncomfortable. "Is something funny?" Veronica asked with an edge to her voice. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen so they could all see it. The balance showed $847,000, and that was just my personal checking account. "You want to pay me $5,000 to leave your son?" I said, still laughing. "I spent more than that on his birthday present. That $20 book? First edition? Authenticated? Purchased at Sotheby's?" The color drained from Diane's face. Richard grabbed the phone to look closer at the screen. Veronica's mouth literally fell open. I took my phone back and pulled up my LinkedIn profile, the real one I'd hidden from Adrian and his family. Sloan Whitmore, founder and former CEO of Catalyst Digital Marketing. Sold the company last year for $8.3 million. Currently on the board of directors for 3 Fortune 500 companies. Net worth somewhere north of $15 million, depending on the market. I watched them process this information, their faces going through various stages of shock and confusion. Then I pulled up the photos I'd been collecting over the past few weeks. Screenshots of Richard's dealerships, Diane's board positions, Veronica's law firm partnership, their actual house in Meadowbrook with the Tesla in the driveway. "Did you really think I didn't know who you were?" I asked, my voice harder now. "I did my research the day after Adrian and I first met. I knew you were testing me from the moment we pulled up to this rental house." Diane actually gasped. "How did you?" Richard asked weakly. "How did you know it was a rental?" "Property records are public, Richard. This house is owned by Select Property Management and has been rented on a month-to-month basis since 6 weeks ago, right around when Adrian probably told you he was getting serious with someone." I turned to Diane. "Nice touch with the Hermes scarf, by the way. You almost pulled off the struggling mom look, but you couldn't quite commit to hiding all your designer pieces." Veronica found her voice first, probably because she was a lawyer and trained to recover quickly. "If you knew we were testing you, why did you play along?" I smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to see if you'd really try to pay me off to leave your son. And you did. So now I know exactly who you are." I took a photo of the cash on the counter and the envelope. That's evidence, by the way. Offering money to break up a relationship could be considered coercion, depending on how a good lawyer spins it. Lucky for you, I don't need your money, and I'm not interested in suing you. I'm just interested in watching you explain this to Adrian. As if on cue, Adrian walked into the kitchen looking for me. He saw the cash on the counter, saw his family's faces, saw my expression. "What's going on?" he asked slowly. I turned to him and said, "Your family just offered me $5,000 to break up with you because they think I'm a gold digger who's only with you for money." Adrian's face went white. "What? Mom?" Diane started to stammer something, but I cut her off. "They've been testing me, Adrian. This whole house, the struggling family act, all of it. They wanted to see if I'd stick around even if they were poor. And when I passed that test, they decided I was actually too poor for you and tried to pay me off." I showed him my phone with the banking app still open. "For the record, I make more in interest per month than they offered me to leave you. Adrian stared at the screen, then at his family, then back at me. You're rich? He asked, sounding dazed. I shrugged. I sold my company last year. I've been taking time off to figure out what's next. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to know me as me, not as someone with money. I gestured to his family. Apparently we had the same idea, except their version came with a payoff scheme at the end. Richard tried to speak. Adrian, we were just trying to protect you from... Adrian held up his hand. You pretended to be poor? You rented a house and bought cheap furniture and created this whole elaborate lie to test my girlfriend? Mitchell appeared in the doorway, probably drawn by the commotion, and took in the scene with wide eyes. Adrian continued, his voice getting louder. And then when she passed your little test, when she showed she'd stay with me even if we had nothing, you tried to pay her to leave because she actually didn't have money? Veronica jumped in. We were thinking about your future. You deserve someone who can be an equal partner financially. Adrian laughed, but it was bitter. An equal partner? Like how you were equal partners with Dad when you married him fresh out of law school making nothing while he was building his business? Or should Dad have paid you to leave back then? Veronica's face flushed red. Adrian turned to his mother. And you, Mom, didn't you tell me about how Grandma tried to break you and Dad up because he was just a car salesman from a working-class family? How you eloped because she couldn't see past his bank account to who he was as a person? Diane's tears were real now, but not the manipulative kind from earlier. These were tears of shame. Adrian grabbed my hand. We're leaving. Don't call me. As we walked toward the door, Richard called out, Son, please. We made a mistake, but we were trying to look out for you. Adrian stopped and turned back. You want to look out for me? Then trust me to make my own decisions about my life and who I love. Sloane could have exposed your test the first day. She could have embarrassed all of you. Instead, she played along to see what kind of people you really are. And you showed her. We left the ranch house and got into my car, my real car that I'd parked down the street. It was a Mercedes G-Wagon, and Adrian just stared at it. This is yours? He asked quietly. I nodded. I have a few cars. This one's my favorite. We drove in silence for a while before Adrian finally spoke. I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were going to do any of that. I reached over and took his hand. I know you didn't. If I'd thought you were in on it, I would have walked away the first night. He was quiet for another minute. Why didn't you tell me? About your money? I pulled over into a parking lot so we could actually talk. For the same reason your family pretended not to have money, I guess. I wanted to know you loved me for me, not for what I could buy or provide. I've dated enough men who were more interested in my portfolio than my personality. Adrian nodded slowly. I get that. But you could have told me after you knew I wasn't like that. I smiled. I was planning to. I was actually going to tell you this weekend. I wanted to take you to my actual place, show you my life, let you in completely. Your family just sped up the timeline. Adrian looked at the steering wheel, processing everything. My family's really rich. Like, really rich. And they pretended to be poor to test you. That's insane. I laughed. It's definitely creative. Most families just grill you over dinner or stalk your social media. Your family went method acting. Adrian asked where we were going now, and I said I was taking him to my penthouse downtown. You have a penthouse? He asked. And I could hear the disbelief. I told him I had a penthouse, a beach house, and the apartment he'd been staying at that I kept for when I wanted to feel normal. The apartment's real, I assured him. It's just not my only place. When we got to my building, Adrian was quiet in the elevator. The penthouse took up the entire top floor, and when we walked in, he just stood in the entryway staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the city. This is really your place? He asked, walking to the windows. I kicked off my shoes and said it was. I bought it 3 years ago as an investment, but it ended up becoming my favorite space. The light is amazing. Adrian turned to me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Is this weird for you? Seeing me process all this? I shook my head. I knew I'd have to tell you eventually. I just hoped it would be on my terms, not because your family forced the issue. We sat on the couch and I showed him my actual life on my phone. Photos from board meetings, the sale announcement of my company, articles written about my business success. You're kind of famous, he said, scrolling through search results for my name. In business circles, yeah. That's why I've been careful about keeping my profile low when I'm not working. I wanted a break from being Sloane Whitmore, CEO, and just be Sloane who's figuring out what she wants to do next. Adrian set down my phone and looked at me. I love you. The broke freelancer version and the secret millionaire version. I just wish my family hadn't ruined the way you found out I know. I kissed him and said his family hadn't ruined anything. They actually did me a favor. I got to see exactly how much you value money, which is not at all. You defended me against your whole family without knowing I had $1 to my name. Adrian pulled me closer. They're going to call. Probably a lot. They're going to want to apologize and explain and make excuses. I told him he could handle that however he wanted. I wasn't going to tell him how to deal with his family. I will say, though, if they want to make it right, they should start with some genuine self-reflection about why they thought testing me was appropriate in the first place. Adrian agreed, and we spent the rest of the evening talking about everything we hadn't shared yet. Over the next few days, Adrian's phone blew up with calls and texts from his family. He ignored most of them, but eventually read me some of the messages. Diane had sent a long apology text saying she'd been terrified of Adrian getting hurt again and had let that fear turn her into someone she didn't recognize. Richard sent a shorter message acknowledging they'd crossed a line and asking for a chance to make it right. Veronica surprisingly sent the most genuine apology. She said seeing Adrian defend me had reminded her of how Richard used to defend Diane against their grandmother, and she realized they'd become exactly what they'd always claimed to hate, Mitchell sent a text just saying, "Your girlfriend is badass and I'm sorry we suck." That one made Adrian laugh. A week after the birthday dinner confrontation, Adrian finally agreed to meet with his parents. I offered to come with him, but he said he needed to do this alone. He was gone for 3 hours, and when he came back to the penthouse, he looked exhausted but lighter somehow. "They're going to therapy," he said, dropping onto the couch. "All of them, together. Family therapy to work on their trust issues and control problems." I asked how he felt about that, and he said it was a start. They admitted they'd let their wealth turn them paranoid. They were so afraid of people using me for money that they created this test. And then when you passed by, not caring about money, they panicked because they couldn't imagine why else someone would be with their son, except for financial gain. I sat next to him, and he leaned against me. Mom said something that stuck with me. She said, "When you're rich, you start to wonder if anyone would love you if you had nothing. So they created a scenario where they had nothing to see if you'd stay. But when you stayed, it broke their brains because their worldview said gold diggers only stick around for money." I pointed out that their logic was flawed from the start. If I was a gold digger, I would have researched them first, found out they were rich, and played the part of someone who didn't care about money. Their test was designed to catch amateurs. Adrian laughed for the first time since the birthday dinner. "You kind of did research them and play a part, though." I admitted that was fair. But I played the part to see their true character, not to manipulate money out of them. There's a difference. About 2 weeks later, Diane called me directly. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. She asked if I'd be willing to meet her for coffee, just the two of us. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to see if this apology would be genuine or another manipulation. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, and Diane showed up looking nervous. She'd dropped the struggling mom costume and was dressed in her actual style. Elegant, expensive, understated. "Thank you for meeting me," she started. "I wasn't sure you would." I told her I was curious what she wanted to say. Diane took a breath and said, "I'm not going to make excuses for what we did. It was manipulative and cruel, and we hurt both you and Adrian." She continued, talking about how they'd dealt with several people over the years who'd tried to get close to their family for money. It made us paranoid and controlling. We stopped seeing people as individuals and started seeing everyone as a potential threat. I listened without interrupting. Diane said therapy was already helping them recognize the patterns, but it would be a long process to undo years of this mindset. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm just asking for a chance to start over, to actually get to know you as the person you are, not as someone we're testing or judging." I considered this and then asked her a question. If I actually had been broke, if I really was struggling financially and in debt, would you be sitting here apologizing? Or would you still think you were right to try and push me out? Diane was quiet for a long moment, and I appreciated that she actually thought about it instead of giving me an automatic answer. I'd like to say yes, but I honestly don't know. The therapy is helping me see that my value system has become warped. I measure people's worth by their financial status without even realizing I'm doing it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. My mother-in-law did that to me. She measured my worth by my bank account and found me wanting. And I swore I'd never be like her. But I became exactly like her, just with a bigger bank account to feel superior about. I told her I appreciated the honesty. "I'm willing to start fresh, but you need to understand that I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. This is who I am, money included." Diane nodded and said she understood. We talked for another hour, and by the end, I felt like I was seeing the real her for the first time. She told me about growing up middle class and marrying Richard when he was just starting his first dealership. We ate ramen for dinner more nights than I can count. I wore the same 3 outfits to work for 2 years because we couldn't afford more, and I was happy because we were building something together. She said when the money finally came, it changed things in ways they hadn't expected. Suddenly everyone wanted something from us. Family members we hadn't heard from in years needed loans. Friends expected us to pay for everything. People we'd just met had investment opportunities we couldn't miss. I could understand how that would make someone paranoid, but I also pointed out that the solution wasn't to test and manipulate people. The solution is therapy and boundaries and learning to trust your own judgment about people. Diane agreed. That's what we're working on. It's just going to take time. Over the next few months, things slowly improved with Adrian's family. They invited us to dinner at their actual house in Meadowbrook, and it was almost comical seeing them in their real environment. The contrast between the rental house and this place was stark. Massive rooms, expensive furniture, art that was probably worth more than most people's houses. Veronica apologized to me privately, saying she'd been the most aggressive in pushing for the test and the payoff. "I think I was projecting," she admitted. "I married my ex-husband partly for financial security, and when that marriage fell apart, I became convinced that anyone who cared about money was shallow. But then I realized I was the shallow one for reducing relationships to transactions." Mitchell, who was still in college, said watching everything unfold had made him rethink how he approached dating. "I was starting to do what they did, being suspicious of everyone's motives. But seeing how wrong they were about you made me realize that's no way to live." Richard pulled me aside during that dinner and said something that surprised me. "Adrian told us about your company, about what you built. I respect the hell out of that. Building something from nothing and selling it for that kind of value takes real skill. He said he wished they'd taken the time to actually get to know me instead of testing me. We would have found out you're successful and driven, and we would have been thrilled for Adrian instead of threatened." I thanked him and said I hoped we could move forward. "I'm not going to hold the test against you forever, but I'm also not going to forget it happened. It showed me who you are under pressure, and that's valuable information." Richard respected that and said he'd work to show me different sides of who they could be. The relationship with Adrian's family continued to improve gradually. Family dinners became more comfortable. and they started including me in family group chats and decisions. Diane even invited me to join her book club, which was full of wealthy women who actually liked talking about books instead of using it as a gossip session. About 6 months after the birthday dinner incident, Adrian and I were having dinner at the penthouse when he got serious. I've been thinking about the future. Our future. I set down my fork and gave him my full attention. He said watching everything unfold with his family had made him realize how much he valued our relationship and how much he trusted me. You could have destroyed them. You had evidence. You had every right to go scorched earth, but you didn't. You gave them a chance to learn and grow. I told him I did it as much for him as for them. They're your family. I didn't want to be the reason you lost them. Adrian reached across the table and took my hand. I know this is probably too soon and we're young and we've only been together for a year, but I need you to know that I want to spend my life with you. My heart started racing and he quickly added, I'm not proposing right now. I know we need more time, but I'm telling you that's where my head is at. That's where my heart is. I squeezed his hand and told him I felt the same way. Your family's test ended up being a blessing in disguise. I got to see you defend me without hesitation. I got to see you choose me over their approval. That told me everything I needed to know. We talked late into the night about what we wanted our future to look like. Adrian was working on launching his business, and I was consulting with startups while figuring out my next major project. We both wanted to build something meaningful, separately, and together. A year and a half after the test, Adrian did propose. He did it at the beach house in Malibu, at sunset, with no elaborate production or expensive display. Just him and me and a ring he'd designed himself. When we told his family, they were genuinely happy. Diane cried, but they were good tears this time. Richard hugged me and welcomed me officially to the family. Veronica joked that I'd be stuck with them now, and Mitchell asked if he could bring a date to the wedding. The wedding planning was surprisingly drama-free. Diane offered to help but made it clear she understood if I wanted to do it my way. I actually appreciated her input on certain things, and we bonded over cake tastings and flower arrangements. One day while we were looking at venues, Diane said something that stuck with me. I'm grateful you gave us a second chance. A lot of people wouldn't have. I told her everyone deserves the opportunity to grow and change. You all were coming from a place of fear and protection, even if you expressed it badly. I can understand that, even if I don't agree with the methods. Diane squeezed my hand and said I was going to be a good addition to their family. The wedding itself was beautiful. We held it at a vineyard that split the difference between extravagant and intimate. Both our families were there, and watching Adrian's family interact with mine was interesting. My parents, who were comfortably upper middle class but not wealthy like the Worthingtons, got along surprisingly well with them. At the reception, Richard gave a speech that made everyone cry. He talked about how he'd almost lost his son by trying too hard to protect him, and how I'd taught their whole family about grace and second chances. Sloane could have held our mistakes over our heads forever, he said, looking right at me. Instead, she chose to see us as flawed people trying to do better. That's the mark of real character. Adrian's speech was shorter but hit harder. He said the best thing that ever happened to him was meeting someone who saw past his last name and bank account to the person underneath. And the craziest part is, she had a bigger bank account the whole time and never said a word. Everyone laughed, and he continued. Sloane taught me that real love isn't about what you have or what you can provide. It's about who you are and how you show up for each other. Now, 2 years into marriage, Adrian and I have found our rhythm. His business is thriving, my latest venture is taking off, and we split our time between the penthouse and the beach house. Adrian's family has become genuinely wonderful to be around. They're still wealthy and sometimes a little out of touch, but they're working on it. They go to therapy regularly, and I've watched them become more aware of their privilege and more generous with their time and resources. Diane volunteers at a women's shelter now, helping women who are rebuilding their lives. Richard started a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Veronica does pro bono legal work for families dealing with predatory lending. Mitchell is studying social work, wanting to help people in need. Sometimes I think about that first dinner at the rental house, how angry and hurt I felt watching them test me. But I also think about how that test revealed something important. It revealed who Adrian was under pressure. It revealed who his family could become when challenged. And it revealed who I was when given the choice between revenge and grace. The money didn't matter in the end. What mattered was finding someone who valued me for me, and building a life based on mutual respect and genuine love. Everything else was just noise. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.